Did the Buffalo Bills achieve the objective of building a championship caliber defense through the 2025 NFL Draft? We're exploring that today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of the Herd Mentality Substack, co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast, co-host of the NFL First Read Podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. I'd also like to invite you to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Well, folks, welcome in. I'm joined today by Chris Trapasso of CBS Sports. We had a pre-draft discussion on the Buffalo Bills, and I figured it would only make sense for us to finally do a draft debrief and really think about what we talked about before the draft, consider what the Bills did, and talk about this rookie class moving forward. So, Chris, thanks for coming back in a pretty quick turnaround here.
No, this is fun. This is, I think, the logical next step after doing that pre-draft show, that it would be kind of a cop-out for me if I didn't come back on to talk about what the Bills did. And I know that we're going to get into the nitty-gritty here, but it feels like maybe Brandon Beane and company listened to that podcast and applied some of the philosophies that we talked about in the 2025 draft. It was a lot of fun.
Obviously, there's no other explanation. Yeah.
They
listened to the pod. He didn't know what to do. He listened to us talk about it and said, yeah, that's the plan, which kind of leads perfectly into the first thing I want to get into, because as part of that pre-draft discussion that we had, I asked you, Chris, what is the primary objective for the Bills in this draft? And you said to field a championship caliber defense. 5 defensive selections to start the draft, 6 of 9 picks on the defensive side of the football. Does it check the box for you, Chris? And overall, does this haul look like you kind of expected it to?
I think it does. I know there was a lot of talk post-draft about the lack of a receiver until round 7, but I mean, you pointed it out. That's what I said about 2 or 3 weeks before the draft when I was on here, that building a championship caliber defense that won't fall apart and has depth in the playoffs. And then we got into the specifics. I thought the Bills desperately, more so than just a plugger, needed another interior pass rusher next to Ed Oliver. That in the many playoff games, either Ed Oliver's doubled and just cannot create consistent push, or he has a bad game, or he faces an all-pro guard. The Bills haven't had that other weapon next to him that can generate 5, 6, 7 pressures in a game from the inside. So they get that with TJ Sanders. We'll talk about him. Certainly needed corner, and I like the diversity from Maxwell, Hairston, and then the zone capabilities and what he showed at Virginia Tech in Dorian Strong. And then they also still get that big dude in Dion Walker, 6'7", 330 plus pounds, to be that one technique type, even though he does want to play more like an upfield rusher at 3 technique, throwing in Landon Jackson as kind of the upside play at the edge rusher spot. Yeah, I think the Bills had that as their plan, and they executed it very well in this draft.
One of my favorite things that you got into when discussing the idea of building this championship caliber defense was getting players that have athletic ceiling, right? Mm-hmm. Getting guys that have physical upside, that aren't just like smart football players, but legitimately can elevate the athleticism of the defense. Mission accomplished. I mean, you look at Maxwell, Hairston, TJ Sanders, Landon Jackson, those are big-time athletes. Even Jordan Hancock is a big-time athlete. Dion Walker, relative to his size, I mean, there's pretty impressive movement skills. Mm-hmm. And so it's interesting to see not only the Bills align with the philosophy, which I don't think was a major groundbreaking idea. I think most people thought the Bills should go in and improve this defense, but to also get the athleticism that maybe has been lacking in some areas was a fun layer to the overall haul, in my opinion.
Yeah, that was key. That was part of why I think they ultimately did what we talked about, that building a championship caliber defense. It wasn't just about, hey, they're going to pick 4 or 5 defensive players with their first 4 or 5 picks, and whoever they pick, I'd be happy with it. Yeah. It's what you just mentioned, that the players that they selected specifically 40-yard dashes in the 90 plus percentile, verticals, 3-cone, all of those things that we like to look at pre-draft that show that athletic upside or ceiling. That was, I think, a theme for the Bills, specific theme beyond just going defense. They wanted high upside players that maybe Brandon Beane wants to insert into this defense and see what Bobby Babich and Sean McDermott can do within this scheme with big time athletes, because they got those across the board.
Chris, I was glad I snuck in a question in our pre-draft conversation about Maxwell Hairston, who the Bills ultimately picked in the first round. And you said, quote, "I certainly think he's a first-round caliber player." And you went on and talked about how aggressive he is and all the different characteristics. Now that he is a Buffalo Bill, are you surprised the Bills drafted him a little bit against the grain with some of the prototypes at the position? And what's your overall outlook on his fit in this defense?
Well, my first part of that answer would be I'm not surprised, given what ultimately happened that we just talked about, that they clearly were like, we need to get more athletic at like every position on defense. And we talked about that pre-draft. Full disclosure, though, I knew about the off-field stuff, and I thought after the Matt Araiza situation that the Bills were going to stay away because of that. But retrospectively, to hear Brandon Beane say, look, the NFL wouldn't have invited him to the combine if this was something that was a legal matter hanging over his head. The NFL would not have allowed him to attend the draft. And he certainly made a name for himself at the draft, dapping up every other player picked in front of him. And the Bills mentioned that they did a lot of work into and kind of investigated everything off the field. Beyond that, he felt like the exact type of player that I thought the Bills needed to prioritize at the cornerback position in this draft. So I didn't, looking back, I didn't send him to the Bills in a lot of mocks. We did talk about him on the podcast, but I just thought that I didn't know any of the details. I wasn't doing any investigation of that sort, but knowing that the Bills cleared everything and had the layer that the NFL cleared anything, allowing him to participate in the combine and go to the draft, makes it a very sensible pick for the Bills, position-wise and athleticism-wise.
What do you think about how these corners fell ultimately? Because I was a little surprised. I mean, of course, Travis Hunter is like kind of a corner. He goes number 2, but then you don't get Janae Barron to the Broncos pick. What was it, number 20? And then your only other first-round corner was Maxwell Hairston. And I'm thinking back, Chris, of like recent draft picks and guys are kind of falling at the corner position, whether it's Terrion Arnold and Quinyon Mitchell last year. They went a little bit later than a lot of people thought. And then you saw a lot of the players that we talked about as options for the Bills at 30. Trey Amos goes at the end of round 2. You see guys like Savone Revel and Darian Porter, Jacob Parrish. These guys all go round 3. Azareye'h Thomas, round 3.
Yeah.
Are you kind of surprised at how this fell out when it comes to the corners?
I am a little bit, especially because we've seen that along with a lot of other positions, the cornerback market has absolutely exploded. And if you can get a really good corner on a rookie deal compared to the top of the market, which is almost $30 million per year, it's a huge win for your team building priorities. So I'm a little surprised with that. I do think, and maybe this is too broad, but I think that what we've seen, the success of the Eagles, and even before that, the Chiefs, a team that was really built through the trenches, that traditional way of building your team up front, back to front as kind of the order in which you should build your team. I think more of the NFL likes to go in that direction and probably just felt better about those skill position players on the defensive side being picked a little bit later. But yes, it was certainly surprising to see only 3 corners in the first round.
All right, coming up next, Chris and I are going to get into these defensive line selections. The Bills invested there with their 2nd, 3rd, and 4th round picks. We'll do that here in just a moment, so be sure to stick with us. Say goodbye to sticky notes, scribbled plans on the fridge, and overlapping calendar invites. The Skylight Calendar is here to bring clarity to the chaos and help families stay organized without the stress. This sleek digital display syncs with your existing calendars, Google, Apple, Outlook, and more, making it simple to track appointments, practices, dinners, and reminders all in one easy-to-see place. The Skylight Calendar has been a game changer for my family. I've got a 5-year-old that has activities all week long. Our weekends are slam full of different things that my wife has going on. This calendar keeps us organized, and I can promise you this, my wife certainly appreciates not having to remind me all the time about all these different happenings. I can look right at that 15-inch HD screen and see exactly what is going on for the week. So check it out right now. Skylight is offering our listeners $30 off their 15-inch calendars by going to skylightcal.com/NFL. Go to skylightcal.com/NFL for $30 off your 15-inch calendar. That is skylightcal.com/NFL. I'm joined today by Chris Trapasso of CBS Sports, talking Bills draft, the draft debrief, if you will. We talked pre-draft about what the Bills should do. Now the draft has happened. Let's talk about what the Bills did, and I want to get into this defensive line situation. The Bills moved up for TJ Sanders in the second round. In fact, they moved up ahead of the 49ers for both of those defensive tackle picks, a team that was looking for defensive line help. So that's an interesting thought that the guys over at Locked On 49ers brought to my attention. Did the Bills trade up in front of San Francisco to get these D tackles? Not something I considered until they brought it up. Your thoughts on this selection? You and I talked in our pre-draft chat about the defensive tackle position and what is actually valuable at that spot, and it seems like the Bills kind of agreed with us.
Yeah, totally. That was one thing that on this episode and a lot of other radio and podcasts that I did pre-draft, that I don't want to say I was the only one, but one of the philosophies that I had was, look, this guy does not need to be, if they pick defensive tackle, whether it was Kenneth Grant, whether it was Alfred Collins, whether if it was Dion Walker, it didn't need to be this huge hulking one technique. And my thought was, they need that other pass rusher next to Ed Oliver, because to me, that has been more missing than just a big body. The Bills have brought Jordan Phillips back, Quentin Jefferson. They've had Star Latulele, those players, those pluggers next to Ed Oliver. And I felt what had been missing down the stretch against a team like the Rams, the Bengals, the Chiefs in the playoffs was that other pass rusher. And funny story, after round one, CBS has me do, this is late at night, has me do a day 2 mock draft. Mm-hmm. I'm running through it. I didn't have the Bills trading up, but at 56, I was like, actually, TJ Sanders would make a ton of sense if he would ultimately fall to the Bills. Now, he didn't fall all the way to 56, but he was the exact type of player that has Ed Oliver-esque athleticism. I think his handwork is better than Ed Oliver's was when he was coming out of Houston.
Yeah.
And he's a little bit more powerful. He felt like the perfect type of player. So I actually sent TJ Sanders to the Bills in that late Thursday night mock draft, mocking day 2 of the draft. So I love the pick. And I love that in the trade up, which I'm usually not a trade up advocate, it was 3 picks for 3 picks. It wasn't like the Bills, sent 4 selections to go up and get 1 player. You don't like that from the number standpoint, that the chances of that player hitting and then your team that you trade to gets 4 other roles at the table. I don't usually like that. So I think the Bills, if you're going to trade up, have it be 3 for 3 on the draft, on our draft pick trade chart that we have. It was completely equitable. So if there is a trade up, I'm getting it for a defensive tackle I'm doing it for a defensive tackle who could get after the quarterback. And I thought that was the one area where TJ Sanders absolutely thrived across multiple seasons at South Carolina in the SEC.
Chris, I see it the same way you do at defensive tackle, but not everyone agrees. There's a large amount of Bills Mafia that would say, I hear you, but this is also kind of a position where the Bills haven't had that big-bodied 330, 340-pound guy that eats space, especially when you want to go light boxes. You have a smaller second level of the defense. What do you say to those Bills fans that would champion that, but also would point to, well, maybe they need to switch it up? I mean, the defense has been the problem. Is it time to reconsider that role?
Yeah, that's a great question. And kind of the idea that I had for this pre-draft, and was so happy that the Bills went in that direction with TJ Sanders at 41. I think, to what you just said, switching it up because it just has not worked in the playoffs, because you face high caliber quarterbacks, whether it's Patrick Mahomes, Joe Burrow, or someone else that's going to get the ball out of their hands in a flash. So having a big body that's just not providing any pass rush, I think is taking a lot away from what the defense can do in those big games. And my thought, I mocked Walter Nolan to the Bills a bunch, and I was into that idea for this exact reason, what they ultimately got with TJ Sanders, because for as much as what you just outlined is the correct counter argument, like, hey, they have a smaller linebacker group, you don't want those guys getting bulldozed by guards and centers at the next level. I think the idea to have the player next to Ed Oliver that can just create chaos in the backfield, that's more important than just someone that can eat double teams. I want the guy that can split the double team and push the pocket and generate pressure on the inside and not put everything on Ed Oliver's plate as really the lone upfield explosive pass rusher pre TJ Sanders on this roster.
Landon Jackson's the Bills' pick at 71, the defensive end out of Arkansas. The Bills snatched him up. I thought Landon Jackson was always destined to be a Bill. I didn't think he'd be there at 71. Perhaps that speaks to the overall depth of the defensive end group in particular, where, guys like him are maybe pushed down a little bit that could have went, 30 spots higher. I don't think anyone would have been that surprised about it. Your thoughts on Landon Jackson being the pick and how he fits in?
So I had him graded a little bit lower, actually, because I was not a huge fan of his lack of production as, again, a pass rusher at Arkansas. But I also, to what you just said, I was surprised that he was still there because 6'6", 260 pounds with almost an 84-inch wingspan and the tenacity in the run game, along with a 40-inch vertical, like those type of players at defensive end are usually not available into the third round. So I think he was the one that was more like the most project type player that the Bills picked on defense. I feel like everyone else is pretty much ready to go. I mean, we'll talk about Dion Walker, the injury stuff, but even Jordan Hancock, Dorian Strong, I think they are off the bus. They can play week one. I mean, certainly learning the system takes time, but Landon Jackson to me is, and I wrote this in my pre-draft scouting report, is an ascending player. He's someone that 2 years ago looked like he didn't have any idea what to do on the football field. Last year started to really come alive. And then in 24 really started to make some plays on all three downs. So I think in round 3, we heard buzz about him potentially being the Bills' first round pick at 30, like a few weeks before the draft. I wouldn't have liked that because of the lack of production. But with those measurables, and again, with the explosiveness, I thought it made a ton of sense and really kind of set the scene for what the Bills ultimately did in round 4. Players that, the draft community was a little bit down on. But if you're talking about getting picked in the 70s and then with Walker getting picked in the early 100s, that was the correct value for those players on the defensive side.
Well, let's have the Walker discussion. In some ways, maybe the more controversial pick of this draft. Bills moved up for him. He's a big dude. Of course, the back injury has been well documented. Play stylistically different than you might expect for 6'7". Yeah. I know he weighed 330, but we all know he played probably closer to 350, well into the 340s, I would guess. Mm-hmm. A lot of optimism from the 2023 campaign. For me, it's a lot more digestible where the Bills got him in the 4th round than maybe some of the risks that are associated with a day 2 pick. What do you see here in Walker, and how do you project him to this defense?
So he's really interesting. He's actually one that I had graded, I think in the 70s, because in watching him in 23, his pressure rate in 2023 was 12%. And that is astronomically high at defensive tackle. If you get to 10%, that's really good. Anything and these percentage points, each of them are very critical. If you're at 11%, like TJ Sanders was in his whole college career, then that's awesome. If you're at 12 at 6'6", 340, that's like Dexter Lawrence level. He certainly didn't play as well in 24, but his pressure rate last season at Kentucky, played on fewer snaps, probably because of the back injury, the conditioning just wasn't there, was 8.2%. So that's a pretty big drop off. It didn't drop off to undrafted free agent level. And that 8.2%, I'm using these numbers for a reason. 8.2% pressure rate was the same pressure rate that Kenneth Grant had last season at Michigan. And everyone was all about Kenneth Grant because he seemed to check all the boxes for what the Bills supposedly needed at one technique, that he was big, he was wide, and he was a pretty good pass rusher. Well, he generated a pressure at the same frequency last season as Dion Walker, who the Bills got in round 4. So I didn't see this first round player in 23 and then someone that didn't belong in the NFL in 24. Now, again, did not play as many snaps. The back injury, I can't really speak to that. I don't know how much it's going to hinder him. Is he going to be 100% by week 1, by week 10? How that's going to ultimately work out. But the player that I saw on film, the length that he has, and again, the disruption, and then just the ability to eat blockers just because of his size alone, I love that pick in round 4. And your little caveat about the 49ers being very into defensive tackles with Alfred Collins and CJ West, I didn't know that either. So that could have been something that the Bills, why they wanted to trade up and act more aggressive, knowing that the 49ers, maybe they had some intel that they were really into the defensive tackles in this class too. So he was someone that I had Landon Jackson graded lower than he was picked. I actually had Dion Walker graded much higher than where the Bills ultimately got him in the 4th round.
You know what's funny about that 49ers conversation is I couldn't think of more different defensive tackles than TJ Sanders and Alfred Collins and Dion Walker and CJ West. I mean, literally polar opposite players. So
yes,
it feels like it could be intentional, but it's also a little bit odd that they would go for such different skill sets than what Buffalo was going after, especially when they kind of had Kevin Givens and Jordan Elliott in the fray already in San Francisco. So look, folks, if you want to be optimistic about Dion Walker, I told you there's people out there that like him. So listen to Chris and not me on Dion Walker if you want to get excited about his upside for the Buffalo Bills. All right, coming up next, we're going to get into some of the day 3 value, maybe some unanswered questions, and maybe the roster ability of these players in Buffalo. So we'll do that here in just a moment, so be sure to stick with us. The NBA playoffs are in full swing, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game from tip-off and even during the game. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. I had a lot of fun over the weekend. I bet on those Game 7s. We had the Rockets and Warriors, Nuggets and Clippers, and that Nuggets and Clippers game was a blowout, but I had a lot of fun watching all the way to the end because I had some action on the over, which hit, and that made that really fun to watch that game. Which players are showing up in the biggest moments? How could tracking their trends help you build your next bet? What would it look like to combine live prop bets mid-game based on how the action is unfolding? If you got a read on what's heating up, why not back it up with a same-game parlay? You new to FanDuel? That's great because it's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Joined today by Chris Trapasso, CBS Sports. Going to talk a little bit more about this Bills draft. We're calling it a draft debrief, and I wanted to focus a lot on the Bills' first 4 picks, but they made several more in rounds 5 through 7. When you look at those picks, Jackson Hawes, the tight end out of Georgia Tech, Jordan Hancock, Ohio State DB, Dorian Strong, corner, Virginia Tech, Chase Lunt, O-tackle, UConn, and then the receiver out of Maryland, Caden Prather. What kind of stands out to you about these late-round selections?
It feels like they had specific roles in mind. And my 2 philosophies for day 3, especially when you get into round 6 and 7, to me, you either pick the big time athlete that is very raw on the field, that you feel you can mold those skills, which I guess would kind of align with the entire theme of this Bills draft, especially at the top, or someone like a Jackson Hawes who can be your tight end 3, who's going to be a great blocker. Or Dorian Strong, who is I thought a zone specialist on the outside. Or Chase Lunt, that maybe would be that high upside type of athlete who certainly does not have the strength to play, I think, even as a rookie at all along the offensive line. So I think that was kind of the theme, that they bounced back and forth. Even Jordan Hancock, I think, has a specific role as kind of to me, the primary backup to Taron Johnson, because he did so many of those similar things at Ohio State as kind of that safety slot defender hybrid.
Yeah, I love how he triggers and plays the run, which is an important part of what Taron Johnson brings to the table. Roster ability is always an interesting conversation when it comes to a Bills draft class. It feels like there's 1 or 2 guys every year that the Bills are not able to roster. Instead of asking you how many of these players do you see making the 53, which ones are kind of standing out to you as guys that maybe needed to go a certain way, maybe need some injuries to actually make this 53-man roster?
Well, I do think Jackson Hawes, even though he does have kind of a specialty as a blocker, it's going to be tough for him. He's got Zach Davidson there that he's going to battle with for that tight end 3 role. And I think the Bills do like his receiving ability, and that's way further ahead from what Hawes can bring. In terms of the other 2 that were picked after him, Chase Lunt, Caden Prather, I think they are severe long shots to ultimately make this team. And I can kind of answer your original question. I think at most 6 of these guys make the team their first 6 selections.
Wow, man. I had 7 of the 9, but
Okay.
that's a good thing. I know that some people would say, well, what's the point in drafting a guy if you can't roster him? Well, I think that speaks to a really deep and competitive roster.
Yep.
And I mean, look at the Ravens. How many players they draft every year? Like 12, 13 players.
They
It
do.
seems
They
like.
do. They do.
And I love what Eric DaCosta says about that. I think you shared this on X as well, where it's like, you don't want to have the smartest guy in the room syndrome, right? You want to have as many at-bats as possible to give yourself a chance to hit. And, if guys don't make it, you draft good. Like, you've got a really good roster that's tough to crack, and you're willing to say, you know what, we can move on from this 4-year rookie deal. If we can get him back on the practice squad, we'd love that. But ultimately, it speaks more to a competitive roster than, hey, you're throwing away draft picks.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the last 2 years now, the Bills have made 19 selections in the draft. Look at the polar opposite of that. In 22 and 23, the Dolphins made a total of 8 selections. They had back-to-back classes with 4 picks each. So I think that is the way, even when you're a Super Bowl contender, like the Bills are, and we mentioned the Ravens are always contenders, it feels like, in the AFC. They have now these philosophies of drafting as many players as possible. I think that's the way to always try to build your team, to find those Christian Benfords in the 6th round or Khalil Shakir in round 5.
Yeah, the sustainability of success in the NFL is very, very difficult. Well, keep replenishing your roster with draft talent, and that's going to give you a chance to stay at the top. When you look at this Bills draft class, what stands out to you in terms of where the Bills found the most value?
I'm going to actually go Jordan Hancock, and that's kind of teeing me up perfectly for something that I wanted to mention with him. You can look this up, and this is why I try to send out some takes on Twitter pre-draft so I can look back, whether it's the Bills or another team. I watched, and I actually double watched both of these players to make sure of this. I watched Jahdae Barron, who I was not a big fan of, and Jordan Hancock back to back. And I tweeted pre-draft that I don't know what Jahdae Barron gives that Jordan Hancock doesn't give. And I would actually pick Jordan Hancock ahead of Jahdae Barron. Now, of course, I knew that wasn't going to happen. I knew Jahdae Barron was going to be a round 1 pick and thought Jordan Hancock could go as early as the 3rd or 4th round. The Bills get him in round 5. So to me, that value, his instincts, you mentioned his ability to trigger against the run, which is so vital in today's NFL and certainly on this Bills defense. I thought he has the flexibility to cover in the slot, make plays down the field, deep in coverage, and he's a big-time athlete. I loved that pick for the Bills. That was one that, even though I'll admit I thought at that point they could have taken a swing at the receiver position, getting a legitimate Swiss Army knife, having watched how important and how good Taron Johnson has been on this Bills defense for the last 6 or 7 years now, I thought that was truly the best value that the Bills got in this class.
Well, even short of if he succeeds Taron Johnson or not, the Bills have leaned into this dime package, right? Probably about 18% of the time the last 2 years. And I think Hancock's kind of perfect for that type of role that Cam Lewis has kind of filled. And the Bills have run multiple iterations of the dime look, whether it's 3 down linemen and 2 backers or 4 down linemen and 1 backer. There's different ways that they get there based on their matchups, but I hope to see Hancock really get an opportunity in that role to get him on the field. I think he'll be a plus player on special teams as well. So I'm really intrigued by Hancock as well. That's a good call out in terms of the value. What about the other side of this? Not necessarily where the Bills found the least value, but what's your biggest question about this draft class now that it's been assembled?
Well, it's just kind of a moot point now because I was, for as much as clearly I praised this draft, I thought it was an A because they reached my objective and they, even the specific objective of finding big time athletes. I was, though, of the belief that they could have taken a swing at wide receiver earlier. But I'm saying that it's a moot point now because I think with Josh Palmer, that we certainly already knew was on this Bills team pre-draft, and Elijah Moore, I think at that point, Brandon Beane's comments of hey, I understand a year ago you having questions about this receiver group, but then you factor in what happened in 2024, how good and efficient the offense was with, guys, Mac Hollins making plays, things like that, lesser players on paper playing really well, Khalil Shakir breaking out, to then now adding Josh Palmer and now Elijah Moore, 2 25-year-olds that I think have their best football in front of them with Josh Allen throwing them the football. I don't really have any major questions. The fact that they doubled up at defensive tackle and doubled up at cornerback. You could even say tripled up if you want to call Jordan Hancock kind of a slot defender. I think it's exactly what this team needed. And again, outside of Landon Jackson, just from my own grades where they were on my big board, the only player that I had in terms of those first 6 picks on defense that I had graded lower than where he was picked was actually Landon Jackson.
Well, Mr. Bean, it would have been nice to know that you had Elijah Moore waiting in the wings while we were all reacting to this draft class and worrying about a receiver. That'd have been nice to know, because I felt the same way. And then it's like, oh, here's Elijah Moore. Okay, I'm good. That's what I was looking for. Speed, upside, route running. I think that he's got a chance to maybe be the punt returner for the team. And so I think in Palmer and Moore, the team just got way better in terms of overall route running, and I think vertical receiving, which was kind of the two missing elements of the receiver core. So pretty satisfied with this roster, Chris. I feel like most people are, and shaping up to be, one of the better rosters I think the Bills have put on paper, and now it's got to come together and go on another run.
Yeah, 100%. And one other point that I didn't mention with Dion Walker, because I guess I'm kind of alone on an island being optimistic about his
I don't think you are. I don't
Bills.
think you are. You're talking to the guy that's the most concerned about his outlook.
Okay.
So yeah.
So this is very broad, just draft analyst speak here, and you certainly are very well versed with the draft as well. I love that Dion Walker's only 21 years old, and I sent out a tweet post draft that he had like 20 something tackles, a couple tackles for loss. His pressures were in the 20s when he was 18 years old in the SEC. Like that, to me, I am such a big believer, not just a quarterback or receiver, breakout age and all of that. If you're making those big plays at 18, 19 years old and at 20 years old, then that to me is a lot better. I feel more encouraged about legitimate upside or a player reaching that potential when they're doing that at those ages, especially in the SEC, than opposed to the one concern that I had with Dalton Kincaid was that he was turning 24 as a rookie and that he was doing it against a lot of lesser players in terms of age when he was at Utah. So we heard Brandon Beane talk a lot about, hey, Keon Coleman's only 21. There's still upside that's untapped. I think the same has to be said for Dion Walker, who still is just 21 years old and is going to be 21 his entire rookie season.
Oh, Brandon Beane coming out and saying that he could have been a first-round pick after 2023 certainly speaks to what he thought of the player. For me, my concern just really comes down to, do we have enough lower body functional strength here? And a guy that really plays with upper body mass. I like his length. I like his quick hands. And I think he's really good, like in lateral pursuit. It's just, can he anchor? Can he take on blocks? Can he bend appropriately, play with good leverage and recruit that lower half? That's kind of the missing element to his game. Sure. And so that's what I want to see come together. I don't think you can be so top heavy at the next level. So fixable stuff, assuming that back can get right. And I am rooting for Dion Walker. I hope to be silenced on my concerns there. And again, like I said earlier, the 4th round is completely digestible for me compared to maybe where you saw some of the other projections. There we have it. A draft debrief with Chris Trapasso of CBS Sports. And I'm going to have to bug you twice a year. We'll do pre-draft and post-draft. This was a lot of fun to kind of compare what we discussed. And we're getting a chance to see the overlap in our discussion and what actually went down, and then having a chance to reflect on it. So, Chris, thanks for coming on and sharing some of your expertise and time with us.
Joe, this is always fun. I always appreciate it. And yeah, doing these draft debriefs, we have to make these like an annual thing, because you and I mean, this is only 33 minutes in. You and I could probably go another hour talking about these players, but it is good to go pick by pick to give our own thoughts on what the Bills did in this draft. Overall, I think it was a really, really smart draft by Brandon Beane.
We covered a lot. We could have went a lot longer, Chris. You know that. All right, folks, thanks for being here. Thanks to Chris Trapasso for being an outstanding guest. As always, I kindly ask that you share, subscribe, rate, and review. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills, and I look forward to catching up with you again real soon.